bigger rooms in the future. That's good. Yeah, it's good. It's a good problem to have. Okay. Are we online? Okay, excellent. Okay, welcome everyone. This is the monthly forum of the University of Florida Center for Coastal Solutions monthly forum, and this time actually closes a really exciting and pleasant visit of two of our colleagues from the University of Central Florida. We had the last 2 days, we had with us Professor Ivan Haigh, who's also the director of the UCF National Center for Integrated Coastal Research. He received his PhD at the University of Southampton and has been at UCF since 10 months. Okay. And he's really an expert in nature-based design, flood management, with a lot of expertise of worldwide projects. And our other speaker today and visitor is Professor Thomas Wahl. Thomas received his PhD from the University of Siegen in Germany and has been at UCF for 10 years, almost 10 years, yes. And so he's really well known also for his work in flood management and flood prediction, compound flooding. And so we're really excited to have them both here and to have them talk with us about possible strategic relationships with the CCS, and we're really excited about opportunities to come and very excited about your presentation today. So welcome for that. As always, we have the presentation first, and there will be a chance for questions, and then afterwards we do some CCS announcements. And so with that, I will just change the sharing and then hand it over to you. Let me minimize that.
Recording in progress.
Here. And then maybe make this. Okay, over to you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's what I saw. See if I can get this out of your way.
It's lovely to be here. Thank you very much for the invite and for hosting us so well. So did I change this order? Okay, so sorry, go back. I always like to. So I'll start with who are we? So we were slightly arrogantly called the National Center for Integrated Coastal Research, but when I came here, I thought we're not national, so I've got rid of national. So we at UCF Center for Integrated Coastal Research, and actually we have a lot of overlap with you, but I also think we're very distinct. And one of the things I love about Nina is I just don't think there needs to be competition. And so Nina and I are both incredibly keen to work really closely together. And so we've already had 4 or 5 chats, and I think this has been, and we've come up with some very concrete ideas of ways we can work together. So we're very broad. We have a lot of people in College of Sciences, a lot of people in College of Engineering and Computer Sciences. So we have 5 colleges, 11 different departments. The majority are in these 2, but very diverse. We have some humanities. We have one of the world's leading hospitality centers, and they do quite a lot of sort of coastal tourism. So again, I think there's lots of ways we kind of complement each other, and really excited to look at kind of ways we can work closely together. One of the things we've done is set up a student, a next gen group, and we've already started discussing today ways of sort of joining those together, doing some academic dating, trying to get people working on similar things. So we currently have, this is slightly outdated, keeps on updated, but we have around 40 assistant associate full professors from across those 11 departments. Myself, Sergio, Thomas, Chris, with 2 others, our salaries are paid for the Office of Research, so we share a building. The others are all spread across campuses, in fact 3 campuses, so we're very spread out, which makes engagement sometimes quite difficult. We have around 80 PhD students and postdocs and MSc students in the group. Again, very spread out across campus, but we're really keen to work with you. So we talked about maybe doing a joint symposium, some joint seed funding, other things like that. So I'm excited the next year to work with Nina and see what we can come up with. And again, talking to Nina, I think it's very interesting. So our centre, we've kind of done a completely fresh revisioning with my arrival, but basically we've got three pillars to do really interdisciplinary work, you know, and hopefully kind of world leading. I've been lucky for the 20 years of my career. I've worked with organizations all around the world, but really, you know, how do we take that science and bridge the gap between science and policy, science and government and outreach? And how do we kind of develop future coastal leaders that, again, are going to sit in that gap and be kind of spokespersons for the coast? At the moment, we don't have any kind of formal educational program other than this next generation group, but we're kind of looking for that. So those are our kind of three broad visions. And we have three primary areas we work. So coastal hazards, we do a lot of work on flooding, but we're really interested in marine heat waves, red and brown algae, any kind of coastal erosion. So I think there's a lot of overlap there. Probably our strongest area at the moment is kind of, I've called it healthy coasts, which I think actually overlaps again with you, but we have a lot of staff looking at marine biodiversity, nature-based solutions, kind of living shorelines. I think this is an area where we're distinct, and I think we could again work very closely together, is particularly with this hospitality centre. We're looking at, you know, how can coasts thrive economically, sustainable tourism, community well-being, all of those sorts of things, but all with a very strong sustainable so, and I think actually these three overlap quite a bit with yours. We have some cross-cutting themes, so we're not very strong at the moment, but we're really growing in this area of digital coasts. And again, I think there's some nice ways we can work together. I never expected to be working on this in a million years when I applied for the job, but we've got a whole theme around space because we were we're a space university. We're developed to support NASA and Kennedy. And in fact, I've just come off a meeting with them. I've called it Coast to Cosmos. So how, as a space university, do we push the boundaries of what's possible in space, but making sure that our space coast is protected? And then we have a broad theme that really crosses everything, which is future coasts. So I'm going to go through this very, very quickly, but we work all around the state. We have a marine turtle lab. We look at heat waves. Thomas and I look at compound flooding. We have quite a big, Stacey Barber does a lot on coastal anthropology. So what I was going to do was prepare a document with just a couple of sentences around each of our professors, and maybe we could try and change them and see if there's some good natural ways to link together. We also do quite a lot internationally. I think jointly with you, we've got a project on the Mississippi Delta. We have a lot of people looking at kind of social vulnerability. Thomas and I work a lot on kind of multi-hazards. You've got a project looking at sort of extreme weather events and power outages. We also work internationally. So I have a big project where we manage kind of global tide gauges, looking at rescuing historic non-digital sea level data. Thomas and I are doing some global storm surge, machine learning, AI work. We look at kind of deep time. This is our anthropologists. Thomas has got a project with the Department of Defense. So these are just some of the work we're doing. So that was very, very quick, but that's kind of an introduction to our centre. We'd love to work with you more closely. And then I'm going to pass to Thomas. So in a weird way, I'm Thomas's director, but rather than having a research group of my own, because we overlap so much, Thomas is actually my boss. I'm part of his research group. So I'm going to hand over to Thomas to tell you a bit about what his group, which he's very kindly allowed me to integrate into, does.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. So as Ivan mentioned, he became a member, being busy with director stuff. He decided it doesn't make sense to grow his own, have students, have postdocs, rather focus on the stuff that he was hired for, and that is managing the center. We kind of made him a member of our group, which is the core lab, the Coastal Risks and Engineering Lab, that I started apparently almost 10 years ago. It feels more like 10 months, but it's been a while now that I've been at UCF. And those are the people we currently have. Actually, I realized there's one other postdoc that's missing. Some of you probably know Gabby. She was Katie's PhD student and joined last year. And you can see we are a little bit heavy on the doctors at the moment. So we have a lot of postdocs, which in parts has to do with visa drama and students not arriving, and then rather have students who graduate, keep them on as postdocs to fill this gap. We have a few PhD students, and very soon, September, October, we'll advertise again to hire someone, or maybe even two, for next year. So if you have students or you are a student and you might be a master student who is interested in a PhD, keep an eye out. There will be an advertising coming soon. And the group is very, very international. Last time I counted, we represented 10 countries, which is fun. So when we have potlucks, it's almost like going to the Eat Around the World at Epcot. It's always great food. And I want to very briefly touch on some of the key research focus areas to give you a flavor of what we are working on in case there's interest, and we can discuss later. And then Ivan will take over again and go much more into detail, and it will become a little bit more technical. So I would say the work in our group can be put into two very broad buckets. The first one is compound flooding. I say compound flooding, we have branched out a little bit more to really compound hazards. Ivan mentioned we have a project with Department of Energy where we look at power outages and how different types of hazards and interactions between them can lead to power outages. And that obviously does not just include flooding. Wind plays a big role there as well, and other types of hazards too. But flooding is still the main focus. And when we talk about compound flooding, I think most of you probably know very well what it means, but essentially it just means accounting for all the different water sources, all the different drivers that can lead to flooding in communities where we don't want water to be. We have the fluvial contribution, excess river discharge, we have pluvial, the rainfall-induced flooding, and of course, our biggest strengths, obviously, in the coastal part, with us having done a lot of work on coastal flooding before then. At least I branched out more into this compound flooding space. So we need to combine all those different flood drivers to fully understand the flood hazard, which is then the basis for us to make better decisions and better manage and plan infrastructure. So for the longest time, I had this little niche where I worked on the statistical aspects of compound flooding. So we did a lot of multivariate statistical model development and applications using things like copulars, which are just multivariate distributions that can account for dependencies between different variables, and you can calculate joint probabilities. You can create isolines like this, and then all the non-tidal residual storm surge events and rainfall combinations that fall onto a certain isoline have the same joint probability. And that's great. We published a lot of papers over the years. We did local assessments, we did regional, continental scale assessments. We published some global papers using global storm surge, riverine, and waves and rainfall data to assess where we have higher likelihood of these compound flooding events to happen, at least from a driver's perspective. So we usually call that compound flood potential, because at the end of the day, just because it rains and there is a storm surge doesn't mean it floods. Some places may flood, others don't. It depends very much on the local characteristics. And in order to account for that, we need typically models. So we also started a couple of years ago to more effectively, aggressively pursuing the use of different types of hydrodynamic models to simulate actual compound flooding, not just the drivers, but also the flood response. And there are different models out there. The ones that we are using right now, Sphinx, super fast inundation of coasts developed by Dataris. It's designed for compound flooding. It can use rainfall boundary conditions, storm surge, river discharge. It's a reduced physics model, so it's not as detailed as, for example, the full Delft 3D model in terms of the processes that are considered, but it's very fast. So we like it because it's fast and allows us to run many, many, many different simulations, many, many different types of storms. But what we are really trying to do is to merge those two approaches and follow this hybrid approach. And that is something that we have been working on pretty extensively with Katie, who was one of the first people as part of her PhD who really pursued this idea of taking the best of both worlds, taking the best of the statistical models idea, combining it with the numerical models to then have a more efficient way to better characterize compound flooding. So what we do now is we use the statistical models that often help us generate boundary conditions. We can create hundreds of thousands of different synthetic conditions, boundary conditions, rainfall fields, hydrographs of discharge, hydrographs of coastal water levels. We know the probabilities of those. We can subsample them, or we can run all of them through those numerical models, and we get better estimates of the compound flood hazard. So that is one of the big focus areas, and a bunch of the students and postdocs that you saw earlier are working on different aspects of this compound flooding topic. So the second big topic I would consider sea level processes, very broad. We are still interested in flooding. Flooding is caused by total water levels. So if you go out to the beach and you look at the water, that water levels that you see is a result of many different interacting processes. And we are studying many of those, most of them. We start at the bottom here with mean sea level. That's the base water level. And that mean sea level is rising. We talk about sea level rise. We talk about this mean sea level going up over time. On top of that, we have tides. Tides can be very large in some places, Bay of Fundy, 18-meter tidal range, Baltic Sea, Mediterranean Sea, basically no tides and anything in between. On top of that, we have storm surges. Some places like Florida can experience very large ones from hurricanes, but extratropical storms in Europe and other parts of the world can also cause very, very large storm surges. On top of that, we have wave action, which can lead to dune erosion, beach erosion, overtopping of defenses and dunes. So we have wave setup and wave run-up. So all of those processes are important. And what makes it complex and interesting is that all of these processes interact in a nonlinear way with each other. And all of these processes change differently in space and time over different time scales. I'm just showing here one example for the mean sea level components, the ones that we saw at the bottom. On the left, we are looking at the linear trend of sea level, so the sea level rise from 1950, I think this is until 2024, the data that we used for that. And you can see some hotspots, including the US East Coast, where we have pretty significant amounts of sea level rise over that period, whereas other parts have virtually no or very little sea level rise, or even negatives. This is relative sea level rise, so it accounts for the vertical land motion. And some places, and you can see that here, Stockholm, for example, is one extreme example that I picked. In Sweden, land uplift is pretty strong as a result from the last declassiation. So that's GIA, glacial isostatic adjustment, that leads to the land going up faster than sea level is rising. So they have effectively a negative relative sea level trend. Another extreme example, Grand Isle in Louisiana. That's where we pump a lot of oil and gas. That leads to sediment compaction. That leads to land subsidence. So in that area, sea level is actually, the relative sea level rise is much, much larger than the global average, which you can see here in blue. This is what the IPCC looks at mostly, or has looked at for a long time. Now, actually, they're also providing more regional and local sea level projections, because it's obvious that this is not representative of what's happening here or here. So we need that local information to actually account for it in adaptation planning and to manage infrastructure. And you can also see it's not just the spatial variability here. There's also a lot of temporal variability. You can see the ups and downs, and this is annual data. There's also a seasonal cycle that we have every year, and that seasonal cycle we assume for a long time to be stationary. One of my students actually wrote 3 papers about the seasonal cycle and mean sea level, storm surges, and tides, showing that it's not stationary. It can also change over time. We have decadal variability. We have interannual variability. We have things that are related to ENSO, to NAO, that drives this variability. And that's just for mean sea level. Again, the same could be shown for storm surges and waves. Different spatial picture, trends, positive, negative, and then this linear interaction on top of it. And again, all of these processes need to be considered, combined, and addressed collectively if we want to effectively manage our coastal infrastructure. And what Ivan's going to show you next is one specific example on how we can do that in the case of managing storm surge barriers, one of the critical infrastructure pieces that we find along our coastline.
Cool. Thank you very much. So about 20 to 25 minutes, but I thought we'd get into some good science here. Flooding is the most destructive natural hazard. Almost a quarter of the world's population, 2 billion people, are exposed to flooding now. And yet it's going to get worse. it's going to get more and more frequent. We always talk a lot about sea level rise, changes in storm surges, rainfall. But what we often don't talk about is that is occurring at exactly the same time that there's many more millions of people in the floodplain than before, changes in land use, people moving to urban areas. Both of those are increasing. We also forget to mention that there's massive decline in natural habitats that act as a buffer to flooding. And, it's really nice to hear you talk about this because no one talks about this, aging infrastructure. So all of these things are happening. All of these things are creating the perfect storm. One of the areas that feels that most acutely is coastal cities where kind of people lived. And many coastal cities, London, New Orleans, are on, have rivers, have kind of estuaries involved. So let's look at a kind of theoretical situation here. So let's say you had a town on the coast here. Let's say this was 10 kilometers. You could build a 10-kilometer defense, whether it's hard defense, soft defense. Let's say you've got a mouth of the estuary, that's also 10 kilometers. You can't, rather than having 10 kilometers here, in the case of London, you've actually got 200 kilometers of tidally exposed coastline. What can you do? I like some interaction. So I'm happy to wait in silence until people speak. So my students, what are the options?
Build a gate, like the Netherlands do. You build a gate when storm come, you protect the land.
Sure, so you can build a gate. Very good. What else can you do?
Looking shoreline.
You could, well, you probably can't. It's a city. There's no space. There's people who live along there. I mean, it'd be lovely if you could too, but most coastal cities, you could do in places, but that probably wouldn't realistically defend a city. But that certainly is something you could do. What else could you do?
Build dikes up along the coast.
You could have dikes everywhere. Yep. Again, it's difficult because there's often no space. And what else?
Retreat.
You could do, but in London, you can't do that. It's the financial capital of the UK. It's financial capital of the world. You can't do that in London. You could do, but realistically, you can't. What else?
Off the top of my head, you could capture floodwater and route it to some retention basin to be pumped back into the sea.
You could do. It's a city. There's not much space for that. So, what else? All of these are really good things. I don't mean to. Please do answer. You can do them in some circumstances, but what else?
Yeah.
What's really radical?
The US Army probably built some big structures, spent tens of $billions to protect.
I guess that goes back to the gate. Yeah. What else? What's a really, really radical solution?
Lifting the whole city up.
You could adapt. So I think there's three things you could do. You could build dikes everywhere, but again, it's very expensive. 200 kilometers of dikes. There's not much space. There's a lot of infrastructure there. You can do what the Dutch do. It's just dam it. No one mentioned that. You just dam it. And this is one of the options for London. We can protect London for 5 meters of sea level rise if we dam it. Now, I've drawn this very carefully. You've got a port here. You've got intertidal habitat. If you dam it, that becomes fresh. Your relationship with the river changes. You lose all of your intertidal habitat. You lose your port. You have to pump that fresh water out. The third option is you can build a gate. You can build some big multi-million-dollar infrastructure. And actually, in many cases, this is the best option. There is it's called the storm surge barrier. So the barrier is open most of the year to allow freshwater interface, to allow shipping, to allow your intertidal habitats. But there's around 50 large storm surge barriers in the world. I focused on the ones in the UK. So let's have a quick look actually. So there's 14 in the US, 13 in the UK, 6 in the Netherlands, 1 in Italy, 1 in Singapore, 1 in Russia. There is more in Japan and other places which are trying to build into the database. But at the moment, I've been working with this international ice storm organization. So this is the kind of membership of the barriers. The Thames barrier in London. So in London, you have a hybrid. You have 200. You have dikes. You have the Thames barrier here. These dikes are very, very high. You do have dikes upstream, but they're much, much lower. But here we have the Thames barrier. It costs around £1.5 billion. It's staggering. This is one barrier. It protects £320 billion of residential properties, 1.42 million people. That's just people who live. That's not people who work. Probably 10 times that, people who come into work. 56,000 commercial properties, 2,400 kilometers of roads, 116 tube stations, 500 schools, 700 healthcare centres, 4 World Heritage Sites, including our Parliament building. So that's just one barrier. So imagine these 50 barriers. They protect, I estimate, about 50 million people, trillions of dollars worth of funding. What is a storm surge barrier 101? There's 2 different types of storm surge barriers. There's horizontal storm surge barriers. So these are barriers that sit on the seabed, sit on the side of the channel, and are rotated horizontally into place. So that's open, that's closed. Vertical ones are ones that either sit below the water column and are raised up, or sit above the water column and are raised down. When would you have this? When would you have that? I put you off by saying was all your answers are wrong. I didn't mean that, but what do you think?
So when the extreme events are rare, in that situation, we'll gonna go with the left,
Why?
the horizontal one.
Why?
Because it's like these structures are big and it takes time to close and open these gates, and not every time you can close these gates whenever the storms come. But these ones are like easy to, not easy, but I would say they are not as big as this ones.
Sure. Cool. Thank you. What else?
It depends on the depth of the river. If you want to use the vertical in the shallow river, it cannot.
Sure. All good answers. What else?
Need space.
Space.
More space for this and for this.
Yeah, this you probably need slightly less space than this. That's
environmental impact. The one on the right, for example, in Venice has a low impact.
There's hundreds of reasons. Normally you go for this where you have very, very busy shipping. So you don't want your structure this tends to be where you have very small channels. In the Netherlands, they avoided this in some areas because they have high pillars and the land was very flat and they didn't want to, there wasn't much high rise that is. So lots of different reasons. Now, these are the 2 broad categories, but there's actually 9 types of gates. There's 4 types of horizontal design. Every single of those 50 barriers is different, but broadly they fit into these 9 categories. So let's whip them through very quickly. These are one of the most common. They're called sector gates. This is the Masterlank barrier. So I'm a geek. I'm trying to tick off my storm surge barriers. I've visited 15 of these so far. This looks small. This is the world's biggest robot. It's completely automated. When sea levels are predicted to 3 meters, this starts to close. Each of these gates is the size of the Eiffel Tower. It is absolutely enormous. They sit on the side of the seabed. This was the busiest shipping lane in the world when it was built, so they didn't want it to interfere at all with the shipping. It can be maintained on the side and then it's rotated into place. This is the New Orleans storm surge barrier. There's your sector gates there, but a different type of horizontal design. This is actually a backup, is a barge gate, which kind of sits closed and open. And this is actually used as a backup when they're doing kind of maintenance here. This is not horizontal, I'll come back to that, but often where you have a barrier, sometimes they want ships to go through. So this is what's called a mitre gate. There's actually 2 of them, one there and one there, but they're often not the main structure, they're often used. This is the world's oldest barrier. It's built in 1958. Why did they build 2 barriers?
Treat as a lock.
This is the lock here. So when the barriers close, shipping can get through here. So why 2 barriers?
Maybe one fails.
Exactly. The Dutch are so safety conscious that they built 2. So if one fails, they can close the other one. That's purely the reason. Yeah. So there's a mitre gate. These are very, very rare. It tends to be in kind of ports and stuff, but these are what's called rolling gates, where the engine sits on the top and they're just kind of rolled into place. So those are your 4 horizontal. These are the world's most common barriers. So and often some barriers have multiple ones of these, but these sit underwater and then they're rotated up to place. This is a small one, but in London, the Thames barrier is essentially 9 of these that are much, much bigger. This is my favorite barrier. This is just a rubber tube, sorry for the poor quality, that sits on the seabed. It's inflated half with air, half with water, and it blocks the channel. This is the Moses barrier. It costs 10 billion euros. There's actually 3 of these kind of sections, about 58 gates. These sit on the seabed. They're pumped full of air and they rise. These look small, but each of those is the size of a tennis court. So they're absolutely enormous. And we visited this a few years ago. Again, these are some of the most common ones in small areas, but these sit above the seabed and are lowered into place. What's one of the advantages of this design? So one of the key things with barriers is they can't fail. And every single barrier has normally 4 redundancy systems. There's one fails, so the Thames barrier has 4 electric. It has 3 electric centres coming in from the national grid, and it's its own diesel generator. So if one fails, you go to the next. If that fails, you go to the next. If that fails, everything is so redundant. Why are these so good?
Easy maintenance because they're above the water.
Easy maintenance. Even more simple than that. That is one of the good reasons. What else? What happens if your power fails? Gravity. So if you have a problem, then you can't reopen it. But again, these are fantastic because if everything goes wrong, you just release the brake and it closes and you're safe. You then have a problem trying to reopen it. These are very rare. There's only one of these, but this is huge. I mean, that's a door there. That's absolutely enormous, but they kind of sit above and are lowered into place. And you have, these are just 2 that I visited this year up in New Bedford. So this is in Samford, and that's New Bedford barrier up near Boston. Every single barrier is unique. Everyone is different, which makes maintenance and aging a real problem. The rubber, the company that built rubber for the Ramswell barrier has gone out of business. They don't know where they're going to get the rubber when it comes to the end of its lifetime. You can't just go to Walmart, go to Costco and buy a spare part. They're incredibly, incredibly complex, like unbelievably complex. They're expensive. Some of the barriers being planned for Galveston are going to cost $60 billion US. They require specialist teams. The Thames barrier has over 100 people on that barrier day and night, every single day of the year, making sure it can't fail. They have long lifespans. The Eastern Shelf is going to last 200 years. And they have a range of stakeholders. And on top of all of that, we're getting climate change. I was trying to think what this is like, and I thought that, what else is like this? And I actually thought of my daughter. She's unique, she's complex, she's expensive, she requires a specialist team of my wife and myself and uncles and aunties to look after, friends. I hope she has a long lifespan. It's got a range of stakeholders. We have to take it to clubs and various things. Now, one of the things I did was, I'm really passionate about working with NGOs. So I actually interviewed the managers of all the storm surge barriers around the world to ask them what the challenges that they were facing. I tried to build my research program around that. But one of the biggest challenges is the barriers are having to close more and more frequently. So the Thames barrier, which I've worked on a lot, is closed 200, well, it's actually closed more now, but just to round it to exactly 40 seasons, it closed 69 times over the first 20 closures, and it closed 138 times over the next 20 seasons. Every time it closes, it costs a lot of money. You have to maintain that barrier every single day. And this is beginning to cause real problems for the barrier. So just imagine, this is very simple, but just imagine you have a year of data. This is fake, but let's say the barrier closes at 6 meters. We have 10 closures. Those tend to occur kind of over the winter months. And we have this very nice long summer month when most of the maintenance work is done. And in the Netherlands, they're not allowed to do any maintenance in the winter by law. So all of the maintenance needs to be done in this 3 months. And with sea level rise, they're having problems now. They just can't do enough maintenance. If you can't maintain this barrier, it won't be reliable. This is just high tide flooding, Katie. But if you raise sea level by 25 centimeters, just like lowering that line, you go from 10 closures to 50 closures. You're starting to get some closures in your summer months. It only takes half a meter of sea level rise to get 10 times as many closures, 100 closures. So you can see it's exponential. By the time you have a meter of closures, you're closing every single day, every other tide, all year round. With 2 meters of sea level rise, every single high tide will be a closure. You can't operate. And in the Thames in London, once you close that barrier more than 50 times a year, there's not enough time to do maintenance. So you might as well build a new barrier. Even though the barrier is strong and safe, you just can't maintain it. You can't keep that reliability. So what have we done? So, I just wanted to present one study So one of the things I've worked on over the last couple of years is trying to create a tool where we've got it working now it can work for any barrier in the world, but predict with any sea level rise scenario, from today right into the kind of future. We've got a MATLAB version, we've also got a Python version, but primarily sea level rise, but also changes in tides, changes in storm surge, changes in some cases river discharge, how many extra closures you would have to do, and also when in the year, how it would change throughout the year. We wanted it really flexible, so we could kind of look at changing if you were able to change your closure rules, change less often by retrofitting the barrier, what difference would that make? Barriers often close 5 or 6 times more than they should do because of forecast error, so we wanted to kind of take that into account. And I'm just going to show you an example for 2 barriers: the Eastern Scheldt, the world's biggest barrier in the Netherlands, and the Thames barrier. The Eastern Scheldt is very straightforward. This is 10 years of tide gauge data. Once sea level is predicted to reach 3 meters, they close, and that occurs only about once a year. So they only close once a year. The Thames barrier is much more complicated, and I'm not allowed to show you because it's all confidential, but we have water level on one axis. We have river discharge, because river discharge is very important in the Thames. If river discharge is low, they close on the higher sea level, but if there's lots of river discharge, they have to close 2 or 3 meters lower. So they have this kind of matrix. Now, because of forecast error, you often have 5 or 6 times as many kind of closures. This is just a simple illustration, just kind of reducing that. It's essentially the equivalent of kind of lowering that closure matrix. And essentially what we do, very simple, is we take the sort of tools that Thomas and I and others have sort of developed over the last 10 years, but we take minimum 30 years of historic data, ideally more, and we create realistic time series of twice daily sea levels going out to 2100. You could go to 2300. Now this sounds, and we do it in a Monte Carlo because these are all kind of random. Sounds very simple, but actually it's incredibly complex because tides are easy. We need to represent spring tidal cycles. We need to represent king tides, larger tides than the equinox. We really need to take into account the 4.4 and 18.6 year nodal cycle, which I'll come on to. Skew surges are much more difficult because we can't just use a random number generator because storm surges are correlated. So if there's a storm, storms tend to last 3 days. So if the storm surge is high on day 1, it's likely to be high on day 2 and 3. You need to account for seasonality. You need to account for interannual variability. Sea level's a bit more simple in that over a month it's constant, but as Thomas says, over a year, sea levels are higher in the summer when it's warmer, lower in the winter, just due to thermal expansion. We need to account for sea level rise, but also interannual variability. And obviously we need to kind of combine all of those. So tides are easy. We can take 30 years of tides and we can predict those out. And we only need one time series of tides because tides don't vary. I mean, you can, this tool is very flexible and you can take into account anthropogenic changes in tides, but storm surges are much more tricky. We've developed a we've got a whole paper on this, but we've developed a very sophisticated statistical tool that takes into account autocorrelation, seasonality, interannual variability. Rather than having one time series, we generate 500 time series, so many, many millions of points of data. So we have one of these, we use 500, I found that, but you could generate 5,000. For sea level rise, we take a projection from the IPCC or the US Army Corps of Engineers. We superimpose realistic interannual variability, which we kind of, again, have statistical models to do that. And then we add these all together. So we've actually got 500 time series. We have one tide, 500 of these, one sea level projection, but 500 levels of noise. And so from this, with the Eastern Scheldt, we can say 3 meters. You can go from one closure to today. You can see that it increases exponentially like high tide flooding. We soon go up to 600 closures in 100 years' time. With the Thames, so that's one of our 500 time series. 2, 3, we have 500, so we can get uncertainty and get a kind of uncertainty envelope. With the Thames, it's more tricky because we have to account for river discharge. This is even more tricky because the autocorrelation is much longer. It's like 30 days. It's not symmetrical. We also take into account projections of increases in river discharge or decreases. Now, it's taken us quite a long time to develop the tool, but it's working really well. Just to give you an example, so this is the Eastern Scheldt. We saw 31 closures our model, we run it 500 times. So sometimes our model predicts 10, sometimes it predicts 50. That's just interannual variability. Sometimes by chance, storm surges don't occur at high tide or neap tides. So there's always going to be a distribution, but you can see our model predicts 30.5, so it's quite close. We had 0.82 closures per year, almost one. Ours predicts 0.72. For the Thames, we have 290 closures, it predicts 214, 5.259. So the model's doing a really, really great job. So let's look at the results. So for the Eastern Scheldt, it doesn't look like much, but this is the kind of one closure per year. This is actually the historic data. And you can see with a low sea, so we have an uncertainty, because we run it 500 times, we have an uncertainty envelope. So this is a low sea level projection, medium, high, and we also looked at a very, very unlikely, physically plausible, but unlikely high end. Now, what is really interesting is at this point, let's go to the Thames. The Thames closes much more often, so the uncertainty is much bigger. But what you can see is really interesting. Up until this point, we're dominated by storm surge variability, but at some point, when you get about 30 centimeters sea level rise, tides become the dominant component. So can you see that the closures actually follow the 18.6 year tidal cycle? And one of the things is maintenance works at Thames Barrier is projected 100 years into the future. So we're actually getting them to change their maintenance cycle to do maintenance at the kind of windows when the tides are smaller. There's the 18.6 and the 4.4 year cycle. So you can see that exponentially the closures go up much quicker at the Thames because they're closing much more rapid and much more often. Once you go over 50 closures per year, you can't really maintain the structure. That starts to happen in 2030, 2040, but really by 2050, you're going to be getting closures. It doesn't matter if it's just 1 year, but if you're getting year after year 50 closures, we need to build a new Thames Barrier. At the moment, the plan for a new Thames Barrier is 2070, but that's too late. The other thing is, this is a low, medium, high, very high end. So, but here we're looking at closures throughout the year. So January, February, March, April. What you can see is we have that envelope in the summer when we can do maintenance work. But by 2050, we're starting to get closures each year. So we're not going to be able to, so we're going to have to completely change the way we do maintenance. We're going to have to spread it out throughout the year. We're going to have to probably move to 24-hour working days. Maybe we can't do maintenance. We actually have to replace the barrier. Sea level slides, those windows move earlier. Now, one of the really interesting things is the Thames. I wish I'd come up with this plan, but London developed this Thames Estuary 2100 plan in 2012, and it was one of the world's first plans to be adaptive, and it completely transformed flood risk management. It's being copied all around the world now. Really, really very clever. I wish I'd come up with it. But the plan is adaptive in two ways. In that it's adaptive in that rather than saying, look, we're going to do one way to protect London, they actually came up with this whole suite of different options to protect London. So it's adaptive in that sense. So here we've got 0 meter sea level rise, 1, 2, 3, 4. If sea level rise is less than a meter, we don't need a new Thames Barrier. We can raise defences, we can slightly over-rotate the barrier, which gives a bit more protection. I think you mentioned flood storage areas. There is a few small areas we can do flood storage. If sea level rise is between 1 and 2 meters, we can do all of those things, but at some point we're going to need to move to a new Thames Barrier. If sea level is more than 2.5 meters, we can't build a barrier anymore. We don't have to build a barrage, we have to dam. But even during a barrage, we can protect London from 5 meters sea level. It's going to be very expensive, going to be a lot of issues. But the plan is also adaptive. It's very, very clever in terms of time. So the Thames Barrier identified these kind of 5 main potential pathways. At the moment, they're following this kind of green one, HBO 3B. I don't know, I understand the numbering. But for this HBO 3B, this is a sea level projection they're using, this middle one. So the first major intervention point is 2040, and at 2040 they're going to raise defences downstream of the barrier. Now, if sea level rises, so at the moment they're going to do that in 2040, but if sea level rises faster, they're actually going to move that to 2030. At the moment, the plan is for a new barrier in 2070, but again, if sea level rise faster, they can move that to 2060. If sea levels are slower, potentially they can move it back. So this is very, very clever, and all around the world, people are now kind of copying this approach. Now, this plan is only effective if you review it. So every 5 years they do a review. So I've led the 10 and the 15-year review, and we've applied these approaches. So let's just zoom in. This is the current situation, really having problems around 2050, 2060. But the current plan is for a barrier in 2070, but that's too late. So what can we do? Our tool is very, very flexible, so you can change it every year. So I'm just going to zoom in. So you can see really 2030s, we could possibly get 50 closures, although the mean is lower, but there's, if things, but certainly this is the problem area. So currently the plan is that in 2050, we will raise defenses upstream of the barrier by 50 centimeters. Now, if you raise defenses upstream of the barrier by 50 centimeters, you don't have to close as often. You can move your whole closure matrix up by 50 centimeters. And that means we go up to 50 closures, but very, very quickly, we go back to the same situation we are today. Now, sea level is accelerating, but so that only takes about 30 years to go back up to 50. So the next plan is to raise defenses by another 50 centimeters. So this buys us time. Now, one of the things I've spent a lot of time speaking to the UK government is this is going to be insanely expensive, but this is the current plan. This is cheaper than building a new barrier earlier. But also, these barriers are probably going to be made out of glass. People don't want to block. How many of you have been to London, walked along the Thames? It's beautiful. So we're probably going to have to build a glass barrier. I'm probably going to have to start soon. But this is currently the plan. And this buys us time, to build a new barrier by 2070. But this tool is now starting to be, so we've now applied this tool to all of the Dutch barriers. We're starting to, I've actually applied it to two of the US barriers, working with the US Army Corps of Engineers. So we've got this work in review. It's taken a bit longer than I planned, but happy to send anyone that paper. So yeah, that's just a kind of quick overview of some of the things we are doing. And yeah, really, really keen to work more closely with you and yeah, happy to answer any questions or whatever you need to do next.
Great,
Yeah.
thank you. Let's do some, my watch actually died, so I was looking at yours. But so I think we have some time for questions. So do we have any questions here in the room?
The impact of these gates on ecosystem, including fishery, salinity, and marshes. And
So no one's looked at that yet. So I'm working on a proposal at the moment where so there's three things. So the number of closures changes the way you have to do maintenance, changes your management, changes your operations. And the tipping point is 50. Every barrier is different, but with the Thames, it seems to be around 50 where they just don't have enough windows. But the big question is the more you close this barrier, the more it interrupts the freshwater, saltwater exchange. So that's going to start to affect your saltwater marshes, your brackish marshes, it's going to start affecting fish. And no one's really looked at that yet. There's been a couple of studies in the Netherlands, but that's something I'm really keen to do next is say, well, what's the tipping point for the ecology where if you close too many, we don't know where that threshold is, but is it 10, is it 50, is it 100? But so that's the next thing that I'm really keen to work on. The third thing is shipping. I don't know if you've been to London, but I'd really encourage you to do it. There's a clipper service, so there's a ferry. It costs about £5. You can get the most amazing tour of London just sitting on this ferry. There's loads of ships, but we work with a smaller barrier in North England, but every time that barrier closes, that company loses $1 million a day. So the more you close, the more you interrupt the shipping. And even now, anytime we want to do maintenance, we have to plan it almost a year in advance. We have to tell the Port of London Authority that this gate is going to be out of action. So yeah, I'm working on a proposal at the moment and started it, but looking at not just the maintenance, but what are the tipping points for both the shipping economy and ferries. So in London, when you close the barrier, you have to notify 100 different organisations because it affects their business. So yeah, that's a key question we don't know yet.
So Army Corps keep building these barriers.
Yeah.
They're building one for New York Harbor.
Yeah.
My question is, has there been any scientifically robust and accepted benefit cost study that shows the impact on the ecosystem is outweighed by the benefit?
Yes and no. There has been some work, but very limited. And certainly there needs to be more. I know the US Army Corps of Engineers for the New Jersey barriers have been doing some ecological studies, but
With these,
yeah, but I haven't seen anything published.
all these Army Corps
Yeah.
studies get reviewed by their hand-picked committee, not by National Academy Science Committee.
Yeah.
Therefore, there's a lot of
And
questions.
it's the same in the UK. Most of the cost benefits analysis are based on housing and business. Ecology doesn't come into it. So, and again, we have a professor whose job is trying to put money on ecology. How much is it worth having that salt marsh there? Trying to build that into the cost benefit analysis. But yeah, it's a very good question.
Are there studies on how the barriers affect sediment or the sediment position?
Yes. So when I interviewed all of the storm surge barriers managers, we're hoping to there is a report I can send you. I'm in the process of trying to publish that as well. But so with the Moses barrier, they didn't consider siltation that well. And so they have a huge problem in that these gates are filling with sand. So the Thames barrier is actually fine. So the Thames barrier is very clever. You have this circular, sorry, where did that go? So with the Thames barrier, you have a circular basin and the gate sits in there and then they close the gate. But what happens is they over-rotate the gate before they open and it flushes the sediment out and then they close it. So it's been designed well. But with the Thames barrier, with the Moses barrier, there's 3 gates actually in this photo that I took. So these 3 gates here, every time they've designed it as a square, but every time they open, it fills with sediment they can't close. They actually have to get a dredger out there to pump the sediment out before they can close. And so these things, yeah, so some barriers handle sedimentation very well. With the Eastern Scheldt, they have 100-meter scour hole. So they, where's the Eastern Scheldt? I think I showed you a photo here. So with the Eastern Scheldt, it's one of the biggest, it goes for 7 kilometers along here, but for one of and they have almost half a kilometer of cladding, but after that, they didn't do the design very well, and they had a 100-meter scour hole, 100 meters deep, that formed over about 2 or 3 years, and it's causing structural problems. Luckily, it's 500 meters away, but it's still, they're having to fill that with rocks and sediment. 100-meter deep scour hole. So yeah, it's definitely, it is being looked at, but yeah, it's very barrier specific.
Maybe this is part of what that last question was getting at, but besides the complications to the barrier itself, I wonder about like sediment starvation of like the coastal areas or around.
Around it, yeah. I have to admit, I don't know. I haven't really looked at that, but yeah, then that's a really good question. I to be honest with you, I don't know. But yeah, anytime you interfere with the coast, you change the sediment dynamics. And with the Thames here, they've got the sand engine here. They've put, I think in this stretch of coastline, it's okay because the dominant sand transport direction is in that direction. So these don't interfere too much, but certainly, I guess most of these are slightly within estuaries, so they probably don't affect but certainly within estuary, they might change the tide dynamics, might change the flood. Yeah, I don't know, but that's again, something would be good to kind of look at. And yeah, thanks. That's a great question.
Yeah, for example, there are like a couple of studies like by the University of Padua that they are studying the Moses, which is the system gate like in the lagoon, where they are like looking at the timing when they're closing the barrier to allow like sediment getting in, because they deposit on the marshes, so the marshes can like keep up. And that was like my question, like they've been shown that years and years sea level rising, more closure, but it's impossible to maintain them, and you cannot like close the lagoon because it's really,
yeah, you can't in a whole closed system.
So my question is, do you think that at a certain point there's gonna be a moment where we have to choose between like the environment and save the city?
Yeah, I mean, I
like it. For example,
we're building.
Close the barrier, you're gonna lose all the lagoon.
We're building more and more barriers, but if we carry on with this sea level rise trajectory, barriers don't make sense. Yeah. You can't close the barrier every time. There's no point. You either need to move to a barrage or you need to move away. I mean, Venice, you're never going to lose Venice. It's too culturally important, but yeah, I think there's some real lots and lots of issues that need to be looked at, and yeah. And Venice is complicated. The barrier was supposed to be closed 2 or 3 times a year. It's been closed 30 to 40 times already with like a few centimeters of sea level rise that's built. So Venice is going to be really.
They've been talking about a big wall, basically, around Venice. That's one, or lifting up the entire city.
There was a really interesting paper that came out last month. I can't remember who the lead author is, Robert Nick. I can send it you, but yeah, they look at they basically take the London adaptive pathway plan and they apply it to Venice. And so one of the solutions is literally to build a wall around within the lagoon. But where do you should we go to? I think you were next.
Okay, so in your presentation, you said that there are some forecast errors. Were those forecast errors for the river discharge?
So with the Thames, I mean, some barriers it's just sea level you worry about. A lot of barriers you do have to worry about the river discharge. So in the you know, every barrier works differently. In the UK, you have your National Forecasting Centre, but they also do forecasting at the barrier itself. The Dutch barriers don't do any forecasting themselves; they just rely on the Dutch. But a lot of the forecasts, well, you get forecast errors in the storm surges, but you also have forecast errors in the river discharge.
But that was a build-up to my actual question. Is that you showed a lot about the heights, the mean sea level, storm surges, but what about the seasonal sea level cycle, which there is evidence of it increasing in amplitude? How has that been factored into these projections of?
Well, the beauty of this approach is that you can just factor this in. So it's completely flexible. We haven't, the version I've done at the moment doesn't factor that in, but you could do. So here, here we have a sea level projection. On top of that sea level projection, I have the seasonal mean sea level cycle, and on top of that, I have interannual noise. I've kept the seasonal cycle constant, but I could have a projection where I make the seasonal cycle bigger. In the UK, it doesn't make any difference at all because the seasonal cycle is a couple of centimeters. But if you were to go to Gulf of Carpentaria in Australia, where the seasonal, so every year sea level changes by a meter, then you could factor that in. So the nice thing about this approach is completely flexible. Here I've assumed storm surges are constant, but I've got a version where storm surges can get bigger over time. So because it's component based, you can, yeah, so I haven't looked at it yet. For the UK, for the North Sea, I don't think it would make any difference, but for somewhere, maybe the New Orleans, what's the seasonal cycle amplitude in New Orleans?
It's definitely larger relative to the tidal range, which makes it more relevant.
But yeah, you could. The nice thing with this approach is I've deliberately built it so you could add this in. But yeah, that's a great question. Thank you.
I think it's almost and Charlie, and in the meanwhile, maybe I changed the slides already slowly, and so it's these 2 questions.
My question is that by increasing the sea level, the land will increase the barrier. We should also care about the bank of the river or the beach that is located in front of the sea. And we should increase the levee in the bank of the river or the dune in the beach side. And beside increasing the barrier, we should increase this 2 sides. And then in the long term, there is a wall between the city and the water, and nobody can access to the river or.
Well, this is the advantage of having a barrier. So if you look at the Thames barrier, downstream of the barrier, the dikes are 3 meters higher than upstream. And the advantage of having a barrier is then you don't have to have dikes upstream, or you have lower dikes upstream. But yeah, you still. So with London, the plan at the moment is not just to build a new barrier, but move it quite far downstream as well. But the further downstream you go, the wider the estuary, the more expensive the barrier is. So economically, you have to work out if the estuary is too wide, the barrier becomes too expensive. So there's always this, and the further upstream you have it, the more dikes you need downstream. So all of these things kind of weigh into the calculation. But the next barrier in 2070 is likely to be quite far downstream in the Thames. Yeah, but no, it's a good point. Yeah. So Charlie, and then I think Vic, did you have a question as well?
Yeah. So I worked on a project a few years ago in Miami where we were doing some tidal monitoring and flood prediction, and I'm just curious, like, is there any applicability to any of the modeling and machine learning that you're doing in areas that experience like regular and constant flooding but don't have any barrier systems in place?
Yeah, so everything we've developed here, you could apply to any region that doesn't have a barrier. I mean, you could look at high tide flooding with this, and certainly some of the statistical approaches. But I don't know if you want to.
No, you just need the threshold, right? The closing threshold just becomes the high tide flooding threshold.
Yeah, it's exactly the same principle. Yeah, we've done. So that.
Okay, could that be applied? Because like one of the things we were trying to do was apply that to real-time data we were collecting. So we had like rain gauges and water level gauges that would every 10 minutes like compare that to what tidal predictions were saying.
Yeah.
To try and send out warnings of like, hey, it's probably gonna flood in your neighborhood in like 6 hours. Like, is
so
that
Phil Thompson from the University of Hawaii has developed this kind of NASA tool where it does every day, it gives you a kind of prediction of high tide.
Okay.
I don't think it has the other parameters that you took, but
Sure.
it's
It's not
certainly
the
has.
forecasting. I think what you are thinking about is more like a real-time forecasting system.
Yeah.
Because
This is
it's AI,
very
data-driven models to do that, but it's a very different architecture of what this one is. This is for long-term planning.
Got it.
I think for short-term forecasting, emergency response, and to evacuate people or let them know what's going to happen, you need a different type of model architecture.
I'm just conscious of time. Do you want to?
One quick question.
So I guess I'm thinking a couple things. One is, the economics of, especially your graph where you showed like there's lots of pollution, then all of a sudden there's none, and like the river's open for a decade, right? But I guess, more sort of feet on the ground is kind of like, are they raising upstream defenses now? And is it all coordinated with the sort of predictions that you're making? Because it's one thing to sort of understand how
So London, I get a journalist contacting me almost every week from all around the world saying London's screwed. And actually London is one of the best protected cities in the world. I think London is fine. I think London is safe. And the reason why it is this plan they've spent millions and millions on this plan. The plan is called the Thames Estuary 2100 plan. They review it every 5 years. As long as they spend the money, as long as they do it, London is fine. Along with Thames Estuary 2100 plan, they have a partnership called the Team Estuary plan. And that's got all of these engineering companies. And so it's split into 3 epochs, but at the moment they're maintaining existing defenses. But the plan is to start raising defenses in 2040. So they haven't started raising, but with this plan, it's beautiful. It's adaptive. Every single choice, they know when they're going to start, but they can move it earlier. And so, the thing is, we have the money, we have the technical expertise to do it. Whereas, places like Malaysia, where they're talking about moving Indonesia, they're talking about moving the whole capital. Well, they have moved the whole capital. So London's fine. And this is why I hate these flood maps that Climate Centre produce, in that they show London flooding, but actually they don't take into account the defense. It's one of the best defended places in the world. The government's going to have to spend the money. If they don't, it won't be. But so back to you. I'm happy to ask your question, answer it.
Yeah, exactly. So I know there's some more questions. Let's just finish the recording up, and then you guys, I'm sure you have a few more minutes to answer. Sure. But first, let's thank our speakers again. So quick announcement. So beginning of September, the next CCS social, organized by our student club, shout out to Leah and Noah. So instead of meeting in a brewery or so, we will be a little bit more active in meeting at Sweetwater Wetlands Park for a morning walk or hike. So please join us there. This is a great opportunity to chat amongst each other, meet maybe some students, faculty, postdocs, research scientists that you haven't met before. So join us there. And then, of course, Pete Adams will be speaking in September in our forum. So make sure to put that in your calendar so that you will be joining us in this room on September 17th at 3:30 to 4:30. So our normal old time. So some shout outs for recent presentations from Daniele Pinton, Jin-Yun Lee, and Alberto Canestrelli, and then from Katie's group here from Stockton and Duzek. In all 3 cases published last month. So big shout out there. Fantastic. Then Vic went down to West Palm Beach. Vic, do you want to just say a few words about that?
Sure, yeah. So met some of these folks at a resiliency conference. And so the city of West Palm Beach and then Palm Beach County It's ERM, Environment Restoration something. Gave a tour of all the engineering with nature features they have in Lake Worth Lagoon. If you've never been there, it's pretty impressive what they've done and how they're protecting the shorelines against these giant yachts that go right down the middle of Lake Worth Lagoon. We were right inside of Mar-a-Lago. And so it's very interesting. They're doing some engineering with nature features right there on the shoreline. You can see Mar-a-Lago. Every time they go to that area, they have to call the CIA to let them know that they're working in that area. But really good group of people. They're very keen on working with us, and we're talking about some proposals right now to collaborate with them on some proposals.
Great. Thanks for sharing. And something that I didn't manage to get on the slide. So this week, we just kicked off a new project between the CCS and the GTM NER, so that's the Guantanamo Matanzas National Estuarine Research Reserve. I think I got all of these words correct. And so this is a project about collecting data. The goal is actually to figure out what data products from the GTM are available and start an inventory of it that could then at some point be formatted into possibly useful for a digital twin or AI interrogation, and also just identifying gaps in monitoring, research opportunities that we may not be aware of because we don't know these data are out there. So Bella LaGreca is a student working on this. So this project just kicked off. So what a shout out is here. So in case you guys are holding data of the GTM NER, please let us know. So Bella is going around and trying to contact people. There will be a survey. We're trying to figure out what data products are available there. A few other opportunities. So all the students here, semester has started. If you're not engaged in the student club yet, now it's the time. We will fire up a travel grant program starting in September. However, you will only be eligible if you're actually participating in the CCS student club. So there will be a few expectations there so that you're eligible for that. And in the travel grant, you can apply for funds to, if you're short on funds to go to a conference, you cannot go because you're missing $1,000. So this is what this program is intended to be, to support students if you're missing some funds for a conference, for possibly a workshop, or maybe a training, maybe it's meeting for a collaborator for a big project, right? So, but again, like get engaged with the student club. There's a couple of outreach events, right, that you guys are already planning, and we really need people to participate in that, right? So there's your opportunity to get engaged. And again, like then maybe a little carrot for that is then this travel grant that becomes available to you. This is more for maybe more senior PhD students and faculty, postdocs. So we have an event or like a 1-hour info session will be online by UF Innovate Pathways and the NSF I-Corp. So this is about technology transfer and entrepreneurship. I'm sure many of you guys are aware that this is becoming a big topic also to secure grants. And so we wanted to be proactive and work with UF Innovate. What kind of support is UF actually offering there to make that a little bit easier, or actually just make you aware of what kind of pathways are out there? I had a really great discussion with a representative for NSF I-Corp about the opportunities there, trainings, and also that actually some grant opportunities that may latch onto previous research grants become available through that program. Fiber is organizing the Conference for Digital Twins for Resilient Urban Environments, DTRU, in November of this year. So if you're interested in that, make sure to submit an abstract or video. It was already like a short ago, but if you're still interested, if you haven't submitted your abstract, I would contact Jeff or Shang-Ji and make sure if you can still get a slot for that, or if you just want to put it on your calendar. Like shout out awards. So Adrian graduated with his PhD in environmental engineering on the dissertation Shaping the Future of Coastal Nature-Based Solutions, and he was guided by Andrew Altieri. So congratulations, Adrian. Well, finally, something that I also haven't put on that slide because I just got the notifications 3 or 4 hours ago is that we actually were awarded by NSF, being one of the partner institutions in the New Gear Award. So that's a Geotechnical Extreme Event Reconnaissance Association. And so together with Berkeley and the University of Utah, we will be the group that is mostly responsible for everything related to flooding, coastal storms, storm surge, reconnaissance from the geotechnical perspective. And we will also take actually a lead on data curation and data dissemination. So we are very excited there to have that opportunity. And that's all I have for today. Thanks everyone for coming. I would love to see you all again in September. So let's keep the room full like this time. Thanks so much for our speakers again. And I think now is a good time for some of the remaining questions while we